Have you ever wondered what would happen if the Straw Hats grew up together? Not as strangers who found each other on the Grand Line, but as children who shared the same home and dreams years before any of them raised a pirate flag. This is that story. 8 children who should never have crossed paths found their way to the same small village on the edge of the East Blue. Years later, the world government would call it their greatest mistake. That village was Fuchsia. The first face anyone remembers is a small boy in a straw hat 2 sizes too big, already causing trouble before breakfast. A gruff woman named Adon looks after him, along with a kind bartender named Makino, neither of whom ever agreed to take in 7 more kids, but they did. His grandfather visits to a marine hero named Garp. Luffy does not really meet the others, he simply refuses to let them stay strangers. Within a week, a long-nosed boy named Usopp is trailing him everywhere, half out of fear, half because Luffy makes trouble feel like an adventure. A green-haired boy named Zoro trains alone on the cliffs until a sharp-eyed blonde named Sanji starts training there too, just to outlast him. Neither stops trying. At night, a soft-spoken girl named Robin reads to the others by the fire, sitting outside the circle at first, moving closer only after weeks of nobody asking. A small reindeer named Chopper presses against her side, afraid of the dark and too proud to admit it. A wild-haired boy named Frankie spends his afternoons building machines that mostly just explode. And a sharp-tongued girl named Nami, arriving with nothing but a tangerine seedling and a fierce refusal to trust anyone, somehow becomes the one who plans everything, who always knows who's about to do something reckless. One summer, a flood hits the cliffside path, and Nami takes charge without being asked, until the village is safe. One winter, Chopper's leg is trapped under a rock slide, and Zoro digs through the stone with his bare hands, refusing to stop even as Sanji tries to pull him back. "Move," is all he says. One afternoon, a red-haired pirate captain named Shanks docks at Fuchsia, and almost overnight becomes part of their childhood, giving Zoro a few lessons in swordsmanship. Then a bandit's cruelty puts Luffy in the water, and a sea king's jaws close in before anyone can move. Shanks throws himself between the boy and the beast and loses an arm. Every one of them watches, understanding for the first time that grown men can bleed for people they hardly know. "Does it hurt?" Chopper asks him later, staring at the empty sleeve. "Not as much as watching one of you get hurt would have," Shanks says. He gives Luffy his straw hat, kneels down, and tells him, "Come find me again once you've become a great pirate." Every child at that dock leaves changed. Years pass training, growing, arguing, healing. Then one night, each of them finally says out loud what they've been feeling for months. "I want to be Pirate King," Luffy says first, like it is the easiest thing in the world. "World's strongest swordsman," Zoro says. "A map of the entire world," Nami says. "A brave warrior of the sea," Usopp says, and this time, nobody laughs. "The all blue," Sanji says. "A doctor who can cure any disease," Chopper says. "The true history of this world," Robin says. "The greatest ship the sea has ever carried," Frankie says. "If we stay together now," Luffy says quietly, "none of us ever chase those dreams. We'll just keep protecting each other instead of becoming who we're supposed to be." Nobody argues, so they make a promise instead. Each of them will leave alone and become strong enough, wise enough, worthy enough to stand as equals until one day they find each other again and sail together. One by one, they leave Fuchsia Village behind, not knowing yet that it will one day matter to the whole world. What follows is not simply the story the world already knows. Same world, same battles, same enemies, but changed at the root, because trust doesn't make any of them stronger in power. It makes them stronger in judgment, in the courage to lean on someone else instead of carrying everything alone. In Arlong Park, the old story remembers a boy who charges in the second he learns the truth, fists first, thinking later, while Arlong's terror over the village stretches on for one more agonizing night before anyone acts. This Luffy does something different. When Nami finally breaks down and admits everything, he does not explode. He goes quiet instead, the same quiet he learned the night Shanks lost his arm, patient in a way that unsettles even Zoro, waiting only long enough to strike before Arlong can hurt one more villager. Arlong Park falls in a single night instead of dragging into a second day of fear. Bell Mare's orange grove, scorched at the edges before, survives whole this time because the fight never reaches that far. "You should have told us sooner," Luffy tells Nami afterward. "Not as a scolding, just a fact." "I know," she says. "I forgot I didn't have to handle it by myself." Word like that doesn't stay in one bay for long. By the time it reaches the next island, a boy who used to cry wolf is about to prove he never was one. In Syrup Village, Usopp does not simply stall for time when Kuro's crew threatens the town. The old story has Kaya's mansion half destroyed and Mary the butler badly hurt defending it alone. This time, the mansion stands, and Mary is not fighting alone when Kuro's crew breaks through, because Usopp already positioned 3 farmhands at the door before the first blade is drawn. "You planned all of this," Kaya says, stunned. "I had good teachers," Usopp answers, and for once, it isn't one of his exaggerated stories. A junior marine analyst notes the unusually organized militia in Syrup Village. His superior calls it coincidence. He keeps his copy anyway, the first of many he won't explain away. The next island doesn't test what they can plan, it tests what they're willing to walk away from. At the Barati, Sanji is not torn between loyalty to Zeph and a new crew. He already learned family is something you choose. When the fight against Don Krieg ends, a beaten officer named Jin sits alone in a rowboat, ready to disappear the way that story always let him. This Sanji rows out anyway and presses a meal and a canteen into his hands. Jin never comes back, but for once he leaves with a full stomach. "Go!" Zeph tells Sanji when the moment comes to leave the restaurant behind. You already knew this was coming. Sanji does, because a boy raised trusting 7 other people never really needed convincing. Past a cook's goodbye waits a swordsman's promise and the man who decides if it's been earned. On a cliff facing Mihawk, Zoro is cut down, blade shattered, but refuses to fall. In the version everyone knows, he never marks the world's strongest swordsman. This time, before he collapses, his blade catches Mihawk's coat, a shallow line no deeper than a thread. It means everything to the man who notices it. "Losing today doesn't scare me," Zoro tells him, kneeling in the dirt. Letting them down would. Mihawk studies the thin cut a moment longer than he needs to, then sheathes his blade and turns to leave the closest thing to mercy a man like him has offered. The analyst's file grows, 3 islands, the same word circled every time. Orphan. He stops calling it a coincidence. By the time they reach the desert kingdom of Alabasta, the old story ends in fire. Thousands of soldiers and rebels killing each other before Luffy can stop it. This crew moves faster. Nami reads the coming storm 2 hours early and pulls half the northern line back before the worst begins. Crocodile still falls to Luffy the way the world remembers, but Alabasta remembers this crew more gently. A tall man in a green coat watches from a rooftop that night, quietly following his son's legend, then leaves. Weeks later, a report lands on the analyst's desk. He requests a full background search and someone finally listens. It's in Alabasta's ruins that the crew gains its 7th member, though this time there's no test to pass. When Robin is offered a place on the crew, she doesn't test them first, doesn't quietly plan an exit the way everyone else in her life eventually made necessary. She simply says yes. "Aren't you going to make me prove myself?" she asks Luffy quietly. "Should I need to?" he says, meaning it completely. A boy who once sat beside a grieving girl, asking nothing in return, never believed trust needed to be earned, only offered. That single decision changes everything that follows. On Water 7, a duel breaks out between Luffy and Usopp over the fate of the Going Merry, and it ends the way it always had to. But Luffy does not simply win and walk away. He remembers a promise made by Firelight that none of them gets left behind, and finds Usopp before guilt can swallow him whole. "You're still one of us," is all he says. "That doesn't stop because we lost a fight. It is a small thing," said quietly, but it is why Usopp comes back changed instead of broken. It is also why a stubborn shipwright named Frankie, after weeks refusing to join a crew he privately envies, finally signs on not because of a burning shipyard, but because he recognizes watching 8 people trust each other. The crew his mentor Tom dreamed of. Trust like that has a price. The world is about to notice. When the world government takes Robin, meaning to erase the last living witness of Ohara, this Luffy does not hesitate. He walks straight up to the Tower of Justice and punches down the world government's own flag with his bare hands. When Robin finally breaks, admitting she wants to live, it is not Luffy alone who answers her, it's all 7 of them together. "Then say it," Sanji calls out, the rest of the crew's voices rising with his. "Say you want to live!" Below the tower, a young CP9 agent named Kumadori freezes at the sight of 8 people fighting like a lifetime of practice, and lowers his weapon long enough for the retreat horn to sound. Sengoku calls off the Buster Call that night, officially for the political cost of the footage, unofficially, because that crew didn't fight like 8 pirates. It fought like something the Marines had no name for. Word travels farther than the Marines would like. In a tavern on the Grand Line, a grinning man with missing teeth hears a second-hand account. A family that makes itself Marshal D. Teach murmurs, filing away a kind of power he doesn't yet understand. That single act at Enies Lobby forces the world government to stop treating this crew as background noise. Every scattered file is pulled together, orphan records, bounty sketches, and one photograph of 8 children in front of the same house, arms slung over each other's shoulders. The analyst theory finally gets a hearing. Makino refuses to explain who they are, even when threatened. She does not have to. The report reaching the Gorosei no longer describes 8 separate threats. It describes 1. These are not 8 remarkable people people who happen to know each other? One of them says, studying the photograph. This is proof. 8 children, given only each other, can grow into something this government cannot control. If it happened once, it will happen again the moment anyone else realizes it can be done. The order that follows is erasure, the complete removal of Fuchsia Village from every map and record. Admiral Akainu is given the fleet. The news reaches the Straw Hats in a single line buried on the 3rd page. Unusual fleet movement near a small village in East Blue, scheduled for full administrative removal. Nami recognizes the coordinates. That's home. They're not attacking it. They're trying to erase it. No message is sent, no plan is made. Every one of them simply turns toward the same small dock. When Luffy reaches the shore and sees every face from his childhood already gathered there, nobody wastes time on words. The fleet on the horizon is bigger than anything Fuchsia has seen. The goal is simple: get every villager out before the cannons reach the square. Left side's weakest, same as always. Nami says, reading the tide and wind like she once read a flooding cliffside. Usopp, Chopper, get the elderly to the caves. Zoro, Sanji, front line with me. Zoro plants himself at the mouth of the square and refuses to yield, closing his eyes for 1 second before every clash. Nobody gets past me, he tells the first wave, and nobody does, even pressed back to the well before he turns the tide alone. Sanji still finds time to shove bread into a crying child's hands mid-battle, then takes a blade meant for a 6-year-old across the ribs, laughing it off with blood on his teeth. Usopp talks a cornered soldier into his own trap, saving 3 villagers no one saw were cornered. Robin seals the flanking route with a wall of blooming arms. This is the first home I ever had, she tells a soldier who sneers a historian has no business here. Frankie's scrap-built barrier finally holds, and when it cracks, he throws his own body against it until Nami redirects the villagers around. By the time the officer commanding the assault radios for reinforcements, there's nothing left to reinforce. The line has pushed the whole fleet back into the water. Word of the failure reaches Akainu's flagship within the hour. He listens without a word, sets down his cup, and wades ashore. The sea hisses where it touches him, sand smoking black under every step. A man who has never needed to raise his voice to be feared. It's only a familiar voice that stops him. Garp's boat runs onto the sand, and the old marine hero walks between Akainu and the village. I've worn this coat 40 years because I believed it meant protecting people who can't protect themselves, Garp says. These are my grandson's people. Touch one of them, and you'll go through me first. Akainu doesn't answer, only studies Garp, unblinking. The kind of silence that has made grown marines take a step back without knowing why. For 1 long second, nothing in Fuchsia moves. Then, a Denden Mushi at his officer's belt rings a direct line from headquarters. A vice admiral publicly breaking ranks has reached higher ears fast, and with the world still watching the crew that humiliated the government at Enies Lobby, the Gorosei decide a dead war hero in a burning village make a far more dangerous symbol than a retreat. The order comes through, short and final: stand down. Akainu does not argue. He built his career obeying that kind of authority, and this is not the day he stops. He looks at Garp a moment longer than necessary, then turns and walks back into the sea, leaving the village standing not because he was defeated, but because the people he answers to had decided he was. Nobody at Fuchsia ever learns how the recall order reached headquarters so fast. Weeks later, Nami finds a burnt transmission log in an abandoned outpost, a civilian tip, logged an hour before the fleet left port. No sender name, just 3 words. Watch the boy. Somewhere in the shadows of the Revolutionary Army, a man who has watched from a distance closes a file he's kept open for years, saying nothing. That evening, the report reaches the Gorosei one final time. We called it a village, one finally says. It was never a village. It was 8 children who decided, long before we noticed them, to become each other's home. You cannot burn that down with a fleet. You can only arrive too late to stop it. The order that follows is the last one any of them will ever give about Fuchsia. Leave it alone. That night, with the fires out and the village safe, the 8 of them sit together on the same cliffside where they once trained as children. Older now, scarred in ways they never expected, but still themselves. Still arguing over the last plate of food. Dadan complains about the mess nobody has made yet, then quietly saves the biggest portion for Chopper anyway, exactly like she always did. Usopp tells a story about the battle that grows more heroic with every retelling, and nobody bothers correcting him. Somewhere past midnight, Luffy looks around the fire and says the same words he said years ago, like no time has passed at all. One day, we sail together. For a moment, nobody speaks. Then Zoro huffs out something close to a laugh. We already are, idiot, he says. This time, nobody argues, because the promise made around this exact fire so long ago by 8 scared and hopeful children has finally come true. They leave the next morning aboard a golden ship called the Thousand Sunny. Dadan, grumbling marveling about the silence already, Makino waving until the ship is nothing but a speck on the horizon. And this, in the end, is the truth the world government's files could never put into words. The world would remember them as the greatest crew to ever sail. But the truth was smaller than that and so much stronger. They were never made into a family by sailing together. They were only ever able to sail together through anything the sea or the world could throw at them, because they had already become one. Drop a like if you enjoyed this one. Subscribe for more One Piece What Ifs, and I'll catch you in the next one.